We laugh. We cry. We learn. But really, what doesn't kill you makes you better at managing clients and everyone. I'm Morgan Friedman, and this is Client Horror Stories.
Hey everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Client Horror Stories. I'm very excited to have Bill Gruber with me today with an awesome story to share with us. Bill, I have my whiskey and my coffee and we're ready to go. What are you drinking today?
I have my beverage at coffee, so great to see you, Morgan. Thank you so much for having me on. Really do appreciate it. Let's have some fun.
Let's do it. Let's jump right into the story. What is your craziest client horror story?
And this story is old. This story is over 20 years old. And I was the head of sales and marketing for a very small spinal products company. So we had bone products and that were going into the spine to help patients with disc problems, so spinal disc problems. And the doctors would go in and they'd remove the disc, and we supplied them with a piece of bone and all of the tools to put this bone in place between the two discs so the doctor could create a fusion and lock those two vertebral bodies in place. And so the patient would have pain elimination for pain.
By the way, I just want to interrupt, which is just you saying that, I'm already filled with horror. Just because my personal experience, digital marketing, hey, buy things from this e-commerce shop, buy this product. It's like, worst thing that happens, your product doesn't work or something. But like, oh my God, spine surgery, medicine, like people could like be paralyzed, and like even just thinking about it, I'm filled with horror.
Well, so, it's interesting you say that, because when we would have to go out and train, our product was new, it had never been used. And so we would have to go out and train the physicians to use the product. And many times it was mandated that we would be there for their first actual human case. And that's where we get to this story. So our procedure was to put these pieces of bone between the vertebral bodies, but to do it anteriorly from the front, as opposed to operating from the backside. So we would go to the front, and the doctor would basically do an incision in the abdomen and then tunnel all the way down to the front of the spine, remove the disc from the front, and then put our piece of bone in there with our instrumentation.
Out of pure curiosity and nothing to do with the horror, why from the front, as knowing nothing about medicine other than elementary school skeletons? Wouldn't you think the back?
Well, that's the easiest access to the disc. Is from the front. It's really hard to get to from the back because you have a bunch of bony issues that are tough to get around. To put it
makes sense.
The way to get to that disc is from the front. And so anyway, we're going to this procedure, but before then, I spend all this time with the physician. We threw the product and the procedure in his office. So a number of times the rep has trained him. We have trained him. I do a last ditch. Hey, here's 15 minutes on how all of the tools work, and I'll be in there when you're ready to go. So we wait. The physician goes in. He has been in there for, an hour or two, just gaining access. There's no need for us to be in the room. And then it gets to be pretty close to the sales rep, who's an independent sales rep that we work with, comes in and to the room and checks, and he says, we're about ready to go. So he and I are both in scrubs, wearing masks, hair coverings, et cetera. And we just go stand on the wall, right? So we just stand next to the wall, just make sure we're not near the sterile field or anything like that.
I would be peeing in my pants.
Right when we walk in the room, you could tell there's bad juju, right? Like bad air, right? Like just that you get like high tension when we walk in that room, right? The nurses are all very quiet. Nobody's saying anything except for the doctor, and he's really upset.
But is that normal? Like how many?
No, it's not normal. Most of the time you go in, the nurses acknowledge you. We're wearing name tags. They know exactly where we're from. There's music playing. A lot of times the doctor will play music in the
music.
Yeah.
They play music.
TV on. It'll be lighthearted. They're in there for 6 hours for these cases, right? So most of the time it's pretty chill, right? But we walk into this one and it is not chill. It is high stress. And so I'm looking at the sales rep like wide-eyed, like this is not good. I get a bad vibe here. And the doctor starts screaming at one of the nurses, right? We walk in, where's my instruments? Where's my instrument tray? He's swearing. He sweared at the nurses. He's like, my instrument tray is not here. Damn it, where the hell's my instruments? So pretty soon he throws another instrument across the table over towards the wall. And then he's got bloody gloves because he's been working on this patient. He walks over and he grabs the phone with a bloody glove. He picks it up. He starts screaming for a charge nurse. I need the charge nurse in here. He then slams the phone down. The charge nurse doesn't show up within the next 15 seconds. So he rips all of his drapes off and storms out the door, right? And so we're all just left standing there. And you can hear him screaming down the hallway as he's walking down the hallway. And the patient's wide open, right? So we're all just kind of standing there. So pretty soon, he and the charge nurse come back in and she's like, we've got your instruments. They're on the way, etc. But now he's got to scrub up again and get in new gowns so he can come back in. So we all wait for that. They bring his instruments in, but he's still not happy, right? And we haven't even got to my procedure yet. I mean, my new procedure hasn't even started. He's just getting access.
Getting access to the spine.
Yeah. So I'm freaking out already, right? It's like, how is this going to go well? He's already so foul and he's already screaming at everybody in the room, right? I'm like, oh no, this is not good. So I start, I'm sweating, obviously. So then he gets to my instruments and I have a laser pointer. So if he has questions, I can point to things across the room with my laser pointer, like, this piece goes in that piece, etc.
Right.
And so, but he's doing okay. He gets all our stuff together. He goes and he's got this big tube. We have it, but it's our tube. It goes into the patient and it sticks straight up out of the patient. And that's what we're going to drop the bone in, right? That slides all the way down into the disc. And he's pounding it in with a hammer, which is what's required in surgical orthopedic surgery procedures.
A literal hammer?
Yes, a literal hammer. But he can't get good access to it. So he asked the table to be tilted up towards him. So as he's tilting the table, he wants the patient to be tilted towards him because he's on the patient's side. And the patient starts to slide off the table. And so he reaches down and grabs the table or the patient, and the nurses are grabbing the patient, and he screams at the anesthesiologist who's turning the patient, stop, 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 right? He's still trying to, then he pounds it in a little bit, and then he's got to get the patient back flat on their back, right? And he's looking over at me, right? Like, really? Like, I got to go to this level of effort for your product? So finally, he slides this one instrument down, which does a cut on the inside of the vertebral bodies, right? And that comes out, thankfully, and that's fine. And then he's got to put a chisel in and pound a chisel in to get these two end plates off. So he pounds this chisel in, right? And you could tell he's not happy. And everything's new to him. And he finally gets so frustrated. He looks over at me and he says, and he points right at my chest and he says, I hope you didn't quit a good job to come to work for this company that you currently work for, right? So he gets my product in. He says, clear all this shit out. I want all this guy's shit out of the room. He looks at me and he goes, get the competitive product in here. He points to me and he says, now I'm going to show you how it's supposed to be done, right? And so I'm standing there. My stuff gets carted away. He's already put one level in. He's doing two levels. So he put one level in with my product. He's going to the next level with the next guy's product. But at least mine got in, right? It was probably took maybe 30, 40 minutes of wrangling for that to happen.
Was that the expected amount of time?
Yeah, exactly. It was the expected amount of time for sure. It wasn't more or less, right? It was just perfect. And the fact mine was in, I was delighted, right? Because I was like, man, this just can't go back.
50% success rate.
Frankly. So he gets the other product. It's a big name company, right? And so he starts working on that one, and it's a disaster. He's frustrated with that one as much as he was frustrated with mine, right? So I'm thinking to myself, man, is it just me? Because he was so nice outside this room, and now he's dropping F-bombs, he's screaming, he's throwing stuff, right? He's yelling at every nurse in the room. He gets their product in, right? He pounds their product in, And then once he gets that done, we need to leave because he now has to close the wound, right? He's got to close everything up.
Plus, I want to make an observation on a point you threw out, which I think is worth mentioning, that he's just as angry at the competitor as he was at you.
Yes.
That's an important and underrated observation, because what happens to a lot of people, and this used to happen to me earlier in my career, is people would be really angry at me because I messed up or wasn't perfect or is like something not ideal happened, i.e. I live in the real world, because in the real world, non-ideal things happen all the time. And I used to just take it very personally. Oh my God, my company, my team sucks. But every time that same person would show that same sort of level of criticism, other products, competitors, people, then you realize, oh, this person, like, then, oh, it's not me personally. I'm not particularly bad. So there's this sort of like relaxation factor, and helps you calibrate who you're dealing with and their personality once it happens to someone other than you, and you realize it's not just me.
Yes. And so, but I will tell you that in the heat of the moment, right? I'm so concerned about patient safety, right? I mean, like I just can't let anything bad happen to this patient whatsoever, right? Because then I accept responsibility, right? Just just do not hurt this patient. Whatever you do, no matter how bad you are of a surgeon, just do not hurt this patient with my device, right? Because I will just feel so bad, right?
And the legal risk and the business risk. So you said it was a new company.
Yeah, because you just get trashed, right? Your product get trashed. We got this brand new product. This guy's so upset. My fear is that he's going to do something bad with our product that isn't necessarily have to do with the product itself. It may just have to do with bad technique or someone who's really angry and maybe shouldn't be operating today. Right? That's what I'm thinking. And so finally, I look at the rep and I said, we got to, okay, our stuff's done. The patient's got both implants in. He's got the competitive implant in. He's got our implant in. Let's go wait for the doctor. We got to leave here. So we slink out of the door, right? And we go back, we change out of our scrubs, we put our suits back on, and we go into the doctor's lounge and we wait. And it's got to be like an hour or so for him to close. So the hour goes by and I'm thinking, oh man, this is going to be brutal. I have to wait an hour thinking he's just going to come in here and rip me apart, right? Because it was just such a disaster. And he was so miserable in that room and screaming at everybody and saying that saying he hoped that I didn't quit a good company to come to work for this one. So he walks in the doctor's lounge and I'm sheet white, right? Like I am pale white. I have sweat rings down to my waist, right? I'm just dreading the verbal abuse I'm about to get, that every one of those nurses had just got. But before he walks in, the rep decides to inform me that the doctor's going through a horrific divorce. And I'm like, well, that might have been nice to know. And he said, but that's not it. That's not everything. He said his soon-to-be ex-wife's brother is the anesthesiologist in the room. I'm like, well, there's some more attention for you. Huh? So I got that going for me.
Well, I want to comment on that because it's actually a really, really important point, which is another learning that it's taken me decades to learn, is that when people are angry or disappointed, or let's say not positive about anything I'm doing or my company or anything, far more often than not, the other person's negativity largely comes from a place that has nothing to do with me.
Yes.
And an interesting dynamic of how negative energy works.
I say it in my head. I'm sounding like a spiritual person. I don't mean it that way. But an interesting dynamic
of negative energy is that the person takes some little thing you've done that's wrong, even if it's the tiniest thing, like there's a speck of dust, like, hey, dust falls down everywhere, and then they'll channel their anger to take this small thing you did and blow it out of proportion into the end of the world. And I feel like what happened here is because he's going through this very difficult moment and anesthesiologist in the same room, that could explain why
he was taking whatever the issues were, hammering it in. It didn't hammer in fast enough. and then blowing that up.
It didn't leap off the surgical table and put itself in the patient. I think it was probably where the blame was hitting me.
Your product did not have any magical components. I thought
exactly.
I thought you had magic powers.
Itself in. And so he walks in. So he walks in and plops down, and I'm just, I mean, I'm freaking, right? So, and he looks at me and he said, "That wasn't so bad. I'd use that again."
What?
I went, wait, what?
Wait,
like, were you and I both in the same room? Like, did I just not witness you throwing a temper tantrum for 6 hours in this room?
Did he have a smile on his face when he said that?
Yeah, he was a completely different human being. Yeah, right? He was like, he went through surgical metamorphosis where he went in the room and he was Dr. Jekyll and he was outside of the room, he was Mr. Hyde, right? I mean, it was just this complete different person. And I looked over at the rep, and I mean, he and I were both just kind of slack-jawed with our jaws on the ground, wondering, what did we just witness? Because it doesn't match at all what we see right now. Here's a guy who just berated me, and I didn't think he's ever going to touch this device again, telling me, yeah, it was pretty good. I'd do it again. And so I think, and I've only seen that one other time in the 25 years I've been in medical device business. That I do think that it's the pressure in the OR, which does change people. But to your point, Morgan, I do think there were external factors at work. I do think the divorce of his wife and his wife's brother sitting in the room were probably factors there. But I also realized that after the fact, to your point, that he was already foul and he was already trashing everybody else in the room long before we walked in that door. Right? That is just the next man up for the verbal abuse.
That's true. Even before it gets to the competitive product, him being that way to unrelated people,
yes,
like the nurse, is also a sign that your turn is going to come.
My fear was, once I saw all the tension, felt the tension, see him screaming at everybody, I knew that there was no upside for me. My product's not going to make anything better because he's never used it before, right? I mean, it's just, that's the part that's dreadful, is you're like, well, this isn't going to go well because my stuff's already going to, not make him look good because he's going to have questions. He's never used it before other than in training. And so, I knew I was kind of in for it right at that point in time. And there's a lot of lessons to, like in your podcast, and I love your podcast, like you say, there's a lot to unpack here. One of them is that, maybe kind of know if you were the new product, maybe I should have done a better job knowing the kind of guy I was going to go in front from, maybe talking to the rep more than I had. He's an independent rep, but I probably should have questioned the rep a lot more as to what's the normal demeanor of this physician. Because I don't
question. Talking to the rep afterwards, was the rep like, yeah, he's always like this?
No, I wondered that, right? I don't know if I think the rep was fairly new, right? And he himself didn't have a strong relationship with the doctor. So I think we were both in kind of the newbie phase of this doctor. But that's bad on my part for a new product going out where you could potentially get a black eye from a doctor misusing your product and hurting a patient, which could then be used by your competitors to talk badly about your product because some patient had a bad outcome with your brand new product because the doctor may have misused it, because maybe it was the wrong doctor to have used your product that early in the sales cycle of a new product launch. And so that was definitely learning for me. Make sure you pick and choose who the first doctors are to use your product, that these folks are well versed at using new products and aren't going to have a mental breakdown.
That is a good lesson, that you always need to choose your clients carefully, but your very first clients for a new product, you need to choose extra especially carefully. What I'll also add to it is I've done a lot of big time marketing, and I've also done negative marketing. Sorry, but in the dark annals that people don't talk about of how negative marketing works, I'll say something what I've done in my let's say I'll reveal one of my strategies, only half related to client horror stories, but interesting anyway, is in my marketing, I always have a strict policy of never lying, always deal with the truth. However, what I did was the following. So it turns out
every single company in the entire world has some user or client that's not happy. Like if you're Uber and you have hundreds of millions of people riding your cars, it's just literally impossible that all 100 million are satisfied. So one of my classic strategies is to find the people who are unhappy, because they're going to be there by the statistics. And then when you find them, give them a microphone and take those cases out and like blow it up in front of the whole media. And it's interesting applying that here at this level. Like your competitors, including the one that went into the other half of the spine, like if there's any little mistake, anything little thing that happens, even if the doctors at fault, divorce, randomness, shit happens, like clearly the competitor's going to say, oh look, they've had 3 surgeries and one of them was like this, so they have a 33% failure rate. Oh my God.
That's right. And that's exactly what happens. Don't think that wasn't going through my mind as the head of sales and marketing as this is going in and this whole procedure is going on. I mean, like, we don't have the high number of implants in place yet to withstand someone misusing it and having a bad outcome. To your point, 1 out of 3, you've got a 33% failure rate. Right? So, that's going through my brain as all this is going on. I'm thinking to myself, how could I have done this differently? Well, I would have chosen my customers different, right? Somebody who's got a lot more latitude and frankly, probably somebody I should have met long before the case was scheduled. So at least I could have come up with a reason not to do the case that day if I had gotten a glimmer of that. However, I will say that both before the case and after the case, he was absolutely delightful, right? I had no indication before walking in there that this was going to happen.
So this makes it a hard case, because one of the things I like doing on podcast episodes is coming up with clever ways to look for the red flags or the clues. And we came up with one, which is as soon as you got into the room, when you saw him being an asshole to the unrelated people, that's a red flag for you, but it's too late because you're already
exactly. It's too late. It's way too late.
Red flag.
I'll tell you what, in this case, what I should have done is we should have asked the nurses, because the nurses know these people so much better than I love that. Anybody else. And it's the same reason why, because I'd been in the medical industry for so long. When my wife was pregnant with our first child, I went around to all the hospitals that I called on. We were trying to figure out where my wife should deliver. And I went to 3 hospitals and I asked the nurses who were the head of labor and delivery, if you were having a baby, where in town would you have your baby? And 2 out of the 3 said, well, I wouldn't have it here. So in hindsight, right, the nurses are where all the knowledge is.
By the way, this is such a good insight. So I love this. I have a few comments on that. First, I come from an enterprise sales world, and in the enterprise software sales, there's a cliche or saying that like the way to get to an executive is to get to his administrative assistant first, like befriend his secretary.
Yes. And
I've thought of that. I've done that a lot in the sales side, but I never thought of it before in terms of the evaluating their personality and their fit to like really get under. I'd previously constrained it. Okay, would they want to buy it? But you're suggesting something much more powerful to like understand them more generally, which like unleashes a whole lot of other information.
Yeah, especially in healthcare too, right? So in healthcare, it's such a personal thing. And it's really hard as a consumer to know whether, in fact, your surgeon who's going to operate on you is the best out there, right? You have no idea what their personality is, because usually you meet them for 10 or 15 minutes beforehand and you discuss with them, and then you hopefully can go online and see how others like them or not. But back when all this was happening, we didn't have Google and Google reviews and all the rest of this stuff, right? I mean, you were really stretched to find an opinion on how doctors were, let alone restaurants, right? So now we've got Open Table, all this other stuff. We can go look for how good restaurants are. But back, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, wasn't available. So you just had to base your decisions on other people's opinions. It was really incumbent, and I still think today, incumbent on really doing your research to figure out what others' opinions may be of someone who's going to cut you open.
But I love that someone is going to cut you open. The stakes are high. I'll add, even though today we have Google reviews and a lot of other ways to get information, I kind of think the old-fashioned way of befriending the secretary or the nurse is still the best, because everything else is gamed, and it's just really, really, really hard to game the person that works alongside you every day. So now that there's so much distracting noise from the Google reviews, etc.
Yes.
Now more than ever.
Exactly. You don't know which reviews to believe, right? You just don't have a lot of trust in the reviews you read today. What you really want to do is talk to another human being face to face and ask them for their opinion that's not typed up on some website. Now, we also have the concern of defamatory statements too, and whether somebody can be held liable for defamatory statements about someone else's skill level. So there is that. A lot of people are unwilling to talk these days because they're fearful of repercussions if they say something negative about someone. And for example, and that was even the case back then, when I talked to those nurses, I pulled them aside. I told them what my background was. I told them why I'm always in the hospitals, because I was a salesman of medical products. And I told them it was completely off the record and no one would ever know what they said, but it was important because my wife was going to deliver. And so, those are important, I guess, small print that you need to provide, or disclaimers you need to provide to these people so you can get an honest answer.
I think there's a whole art to befriending a nurse or secretary, etc., and getting them to open up. Sometimes it's just being around enough and then creating the context so that it's natural to go have a coffee. And once you've had a coffee, you can have another coffee and a third coffee. And you've had coffee with someone 3 times, you're friends. And by the 4th time, they're opening up to you about everything.
That's right. I agree.
So one very, very important lesson is to befriend the nurse. And actually, I'd want to make another point on that, which is the power differential between the boss and the secretary, or the doctor and the nurse, is an important component, because usually if you befriend someone at their same level, that's where they're going to be more careful and more concerned about what we're saying. Like the doctor, like the lawyer does not want to be disbarred. The doctor does not want to have his license revoked, whatever the medical.
That's a great point. So one doctor isn't going to tell you anything about another doctor for fear of professional courtesy between one versus the other. So you're right. If they're at the same level, it's really hard. But if they're at a lower level or a higher level, you will likely get a more candid type of response.
100%. What I like about this is in a lot of episodes of Client Horror Stories, we look for red flags. Now we're coming up with Machiavellian approaches to say, how do we understand how much of an asshole this person potentially is? Oh, let's go find different people in their office or know them in these different contexts in order to really get at their personalities.
Yeah, well, think about it. If I had gone to any of those nurses who've been blistered by this guy more than once, I mean, this can't be the only time this has happened, right? So if I went to any of those nurses, or if the sales rep had gone to any of those nurses and said, hey, we're thinking about doing our first case with Dr. So-and-so on this day, what do you think their response would have been to us? Run. They would have told us, run, leave town, don't do this, right?
What I'd also point out is, to make it even more Machiavellian, when you go to the nurses or the less powerful or more powerful people, then the art of reading between the lines becomes even more important, because I can see many situations where I would go to a nurse and her response when I say, hey, should I work with Dr. So-and-so as a first trial, like the nurses I know, like my friends who are nurses, would respond by just rolling their eyes, not even saying anything. And you need to be like savvy and quick enough to like notice the rolling of the eyes, and then to be able to comment on it in a way that makes them want to talk. I saw the eye roll, what happened? And then they'll say something like, long story, too much to get into. And you're like, come on, you can't tease me like that. I know, let's go have a coffee, and you can tell me off the record. But it's all these like picking up on these signs, making them feel comfortable, and so you can get the real dirt out.
Yeah, and I think part of it's just questioning anybody, right? You can ask a bunch of questions around the topic, and you can tell by their evasiveness whether
Yes.
they don't want to answer you. And if they don't want to answer you, you've already got your answer, in my opinion.
Yes,
People
yes, yes.
are more than happy to tell you how great someone is, but if they're not going to tell you, it's like when you're calling references on somebody that you're trying to hire, and the reference says, "Well, all I can tell you is they worked here." And then you start to ask them a bunch more questions. They say, "Yeah, sorry, all I can really tell you is they worked here." Now, that's a red flag, right? Now, if you call someone as a reference and they're effusive in their praise, well, that's one thing. But if they just won't answer and start saying, "Well, policy is all we'll say is that they worked here during these 2 dates," that's a red flag.
And but by the way, yes, also I'd say that this category of red flags, in my experience, gets really subtle and complex because, for example, length is a factor. Let's say that they give you a glowing great response, like a great response, but it was one sentence long. "Hey, I'm hiring a new CEO of this company. This person has applied for this $1 zillion job. You work with him. Would you recommend him? You know, John was an effective CEO." Like that on the surface, like artificial intelligence, parse that sentence. It sounds like it's a positive. It's not a neutral. It's not a neutral objective. He worked here. It's actually a compliment. But the fact that in this context, giving a one sentence compliment actually means it's not a compliment.
Yeah,
Like
that's right. That's right. It could be a backhanded compliment for sure, right?
Like I would not hire. John was an efficient CEO. Dude, I'm running far away from him. Even like if that's all he has to say and he doesn't explain it or go into more detail. So what this means is like length. How much do they actually say? And like do these different characteristics that go into try to read between the lines of people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That's why I also think that like a lot of these physicians, a lot of the orthopedic surgeons, they had their own standard nurse that they employed that would work with them, and they would scrub the cases with them. And those people are paid for by the doctor and the doctor's group. And so they wouldn't be the right persons to ask in this instance that we had just discussed. That's why you need to go to somebody who's not employed or has any personal vested interest in making sure the doctor, she or he is saying something good about the doctor. Those are the people that you need to talk to determine whether you're about to walk across 6 miles of hot coals, right? While you're standing in the procedure and he's berating you. So, I get onus is on me. I can't just blame this one on the doctor. I probably should have asked the rep to maybe do some better due diligence on what this person's like in the operating room, because clearly the rep didn't have the insight necessary to prep us for that case, which is why I think I have more gray beard and gray hairs now from standing in that case. So
that is a great learning. Were there any other particular learnings from this experience?
I would love to say that if I were to do it over again, I kind of felt trapped, right? Because I walk in the room, it's not like you could say, "Hey, you mind if we come by tomorrow?" Right? That doesn't work, right? If today's a bad day, do you guys mind if we stop back? I mean, the patient's open. I mean, there's nothing we can do. And he was fine, an hour and a half ago when I talked to him, and he's not fine now. And so, I'm completely trapped in that instance. I think the only thing you can do in hindsight is just query the person who's, in my instance, the rep, this is the independent rep, just to make sure they're experienced enough to know that they're going to put you with someone who is well known to have a good operating room demeanor, right? And that's where maybe I was taking too big a leap of faith in the sales rep that they had a relationship with this physician that would have safeguarded us both walking in there to a tense situation like this. And he didn't. He was either too new or didn't have the relationship there. And I should have done a better job asking the rep, or at least vetting the rep's relationship with the physician more than I did.
Interesting. I like that. I love your phrase, having good operating room demeanor. And what's interesting is in this modern world where everything is judged by the numbers, you'll analyze doctors and all professionals by what is their success rate, whatever the metric used is this. But maybe this doctor, like who's a total asshole, maybe he had like a near 100% success rate, and maybe he was an amazing doctor, and how good you are is completely separate from your demeanor. And I think when people choose who to work with, and this is not just clients, but who's your boss is going to be, what company you'll work for, who you'll hire, people don't take demeanor into account enough. They just look at, well, show me the numbers. Can you do this? What is the cost? What are the rates? And so on.
But I think, I'm a big fan of the whole people person thing. I think if you're not a good person and treat others well, then I don't think you're going to have good success. In this instance, I think your outcomes may not be great. I think outcomes from any transaction depend on people and people's willingness to treat each other with respect. He clearly didn't treat the nurses with respect. Why would he expect those nurses to give him their top performance if he just didn't respect them? Right. And in any instance, if in any role that any of us are in, right, that in our jobs, if we treat all the people around us with utmost respect, regardless of whether we're the boss in the room, if you will, if we want top performance from those people, we should treat them with the utmost in respect and courtesy that we possibly can. We can't expect that by browbeating them and treating them like shit that they're going to give us their best, right? That's foolish to think that.
Such a powerful point, and I think it applies to every professional, every job. When I try to think of my examples I know of this sort of dynamic of having to choose between the best or the nice, unexpectedly, the first example that comes to mind is a medical related example, which is when I was in my 20s. I dated pretty seriously this nice Jewish girl from Chicago who's from a very rich family there, and her mom had some horrific form of cancer right before I met her that was likely to be fatal. And I'll always remember this story that she told me about when they chose a doctor, where the two finalists of the different doctors that they're interviewing, one was the super specialist in Chicago who had this huge success rate, but he was but in every meeting with him, he was this complete dickwad, asshole, terrible. Yeah. And the other candidate they liked was one who was not bad, but wasn't a superstar, but was the nicest, sweetest one ever. And they went with the candidate number 2.
Yep.
And I remember hearing that story. I was 25, and this had happened just a couple years earlier, shortly before I met her. And it was the first time in my life where my eyes opened. Wow, people who aren't concerned about money don't choose the one most likely to succeed, but they put what you call demeanor first. And it's you're literally lowering the chances of survival chances, because you don't want to deal with such a terrible person. That's very powerful.
Well, in medicine, it also demonstrates if a physician is screaming or arrogant, pompous, kind of a know-it-all, they're putting themselves in front of the patient's care, right? It's all about them. They want to talk about them. They want to prove how good they are, as opposed to the physicians. And I've spent, the better part of my career talking to so many doctors, and the ones that I would send my family to or go to myself are the ones who put the patient first. And they're the ones who would look at me and say, and if you don't like this path that I have laid out for your care, I urge you to get a second opinion. Those are the ones who are very confident in their abilities, right? And they're even telling you, go see somebody else to make sure that you really feel good about the choice you make on which therapy you want to do. That's the person that I want to go to, right? Self-confident, not arrogant, right? And that's what we would want in anybody who was going to work with us in any situation is self-confidence, yes. Arrogance, completely no. And to some point, arrogance also sometimes is a great facade for someone who's completely incompetent and doesn't have any self-confidence. And that's not the person. Somebody with no self-confidence is not someone I want cutting me open, right? And sometimes if they have this veneer of arrogance about them, they're hiding the fact that they're completely, have a complete lack of self-confidence in the operating room. And that scares the hell out of me, frankly.
And no, I agree with that. And where it gets difficult is there's a very fine line between self-confidence and arrogance.
Yeah.
It's easy for me to imagine people who are just less sophisticated or had a rougher childhood.
Yes.
Who are very self-confident because they're good, but they don't phrase things in the right way. They don't have the particular level of saying things in the generous, open way that I want them to say it. They say it in the brutal sort of way.
Yep, I would agree. With you.
By the way, I remember what you said just reminded me of something from my college years. So I wrote my thesis on the history of the professions. Basically, interestingly now, like 30-ish, almost 30 years later, I'm still kind of interested in the same thing. Client horror stories is kind of about how to be a professional. So even when I was 22, I was thinking about professional behavior. And I remember in some book I read back then about the development of the different professions. I remember I read in the early 20th century, there used to be a saying among doctors that, P.S., you spend far more time around doctors than I have, so I know near zero. So I have no idea if this is even still said today, but in the early 20th century, there used to be a saying around about doctors that they would say, patients choose which doctor you use by the 3 A's, which are availability, affability, and ability, in that order. And it's kind of the same point we're saying. The three A's in that order: availability. The first criteria you look for is are they around? Do they have
That's
the
right.
time?
Can I see them? Yeah.
Can I see them? Exactly, dude. If someone's booked for the next 6 years, you're like, dude, I probably don't want to wait 6 years for the operation. Then the second A after that was affability. And that word, we still use a little bit in English, but it's a lot less common.
Yes, I agree.
But it's an older word that meant friendliness. And
Yes.
he's so affable, he's so friendly. And that's kind of what your point about demeanor, like affability is like, so the most important are they around, availability, then affability, are they friendly? And then the third one, the least important, is ability.
Yeah.
Like,
are they capable?
How good are they? And this is exactly the point. Like ex-girlfriend Sarah's family chose the affable over the ability, falling right into that pattern.
Yes, I would tend to agree with that, right? That sometimes the best physicians I watched perform surgery were also the surgeons who were the nicest to work with, right? Because they had self-confidence. They were confident enough to confident in their own abilities, which also made them confident in their ability to work with others and also be criticized, right? They were fine if you wanted to criticize them. They weren't completely defensible, and clearly could admit fault, right? And so I do think that makes a big difference in physicians, at least. But I also would carry that out to non-physician roles as well. People who are willing to admit mistakes are the kinds of people that I want to work with.
1,000%. 1,000%. Think correctness in the small implies correctness in the large. And what I mean by that is people who are willing to say they messed up on even the smaller things. That to me implies that when they make bigger mistakes, they'll be willing to mess up as well. So they'll be willing to admit that they messed up.
Yeah.
And let's learn for it. So when I evaluate people, something that I look for is when they make very small mistakes, how do they behave?
Yes. Yep. It's great. Part of it's reading people, right? I mean, I think that's a great skill. And one of the things that is more difficult today, because we do so much electronically, we send everything in emails. We don't jump on the phone and have phone conversations like we used to, because email is so prevalent and texting is so prevalent. And it's much more difficult to read situations like I misread that one. When things are typed and on a flat page, then when you and I are sitting here face to face, or when we're on the telephone and we can hear voice inflection and we understand each other's position, our intent through how we voice things. And so I do think that is an art, that is something that we must continue to try to build, right, and refine as we kind of go through our lives. Is let's force more face-to-face interaction, because we can do a better job reading someone's honesty, integrity, and intent by having face-to-face conversations, rather than misunderstanding someone's intent or honesty by just looking at a flat page email or text.
I agree with that 1,000,000%. And in an interesting way I've changed over the last few years since COVID is, well, here's a way in which I think the same, and I haven't changed, that the ideal to judge and understand someone is to be there physically in person. And
yes,
then almost as good as that, but not as good as that, is video like this.
Yes.
Like even just seeing you like this, even though you're not there, and I can see you're a nice guy. You're not like this doctor of the story. And I think before the pandemic, I would have said in person, and then as a distant second to try to understand, get to know people. Yes, Skype, video. But now I think we've all gotten so used to the video culture. I think I'm much better at reading, getting to know, understanding how affable someone may be through video chats like this than I was 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's a skill. I really do. I also, and I'm with you, Morgan, I believe that we need to still push the face-to-face when we can, right? I'm really a big believer in that, right? Especially as people are starting to work virtually. And I've written about this, that I think in certain situations, we need to force, even when people are working, and you work remotely to a great extent, but forcing the human interaction, the face-to-face interaction a couple times a year to try to foster trust, understanding, and a personal relationship that then we can leverage through phone calls, video calls, text, email later, right? But we do need the human contact, right? Human beings do have an affinity to personal contact.
1,000%. And with the importance of personal contact, it is a beautiful, beautiful point to end our episode on. Bill, we've gotten so many interesting insights, and then the conversation took a few surprising detours, but I loved it, and I love the strategy of expanding. Get to know the nurses. I think that is. I think there are a few takeaways. That's one takeaway. Another takeaway is availability, affability, ability applies not just to doctors, but to everything and everyone you would ever want to hire.
Yeah, it's a great point. So, it's a great point, Morgan. It really is. Well, and this has been terrific. It's just a pleasure speaking with you. It's been great getting to know you in advance of this call. And certainly I look forward to our next interaction. And hopefully we can do what we say we're going to do and maybe clink glasses 1-to-1 someday when we're in the same city.
Yeah, and that will be great. I will be at Boston at some point. I don't know. And don't hold your breath.
Yeah. Well, you know how to reach me. Look me up. I'll buy the first round. How's that?
Oh, yeah. Now I'm there. And everyone watching this episode that's made it to the end, I hope you've learned as much as we have and you've enjoyed it as much as we have as well. Thank you for watching. Until next time.